I mean, it just brings the chills up my spine.
Yeah.
What do you think? There he is, the coffin in that frozen ground with people looking over it.
Yeah, and it barely is in the ground.
That's right. It barely is.
And the lantern casting that eerie look like when you hold the flashlight up.
Yeah.
Welcome to Seeing Dead People, the slow burn storytelling podcast where our host, Nicola, challenges her psychic friend Darcy to communicate with the dead and unravel historical ghost stories, unsolved true crime mysteries, and all things paranormal. If you want to be spooked, amazed, and entertained, stick around for an astonishing, deep dive convo with the spirits on the other side. And now, RadioSidney presents Seeing Dead People, episode 33, A Cold Arctic Death.
Want to be a famous Arctic explorer, Darcy?
No, I don't like the cold.
Well, I really hope you've got your extra thermal heavy-duty long johns on, because today we're heading north, almost as far north as one can go, right up to the frigid cold of the Arctic Circle to examine one of the most famous deaths in historical Arctic exploration. Have you got any chilling sense of what's going to happen today?
Well, there's going to be murder, of course.
Maybe.
But I remember something from childhood in our social class, something about the North, but that's it. Cold, ice, Frankenstein. There was a book I read where Frankenstein went across the Arctic to find his monster.
Exactly. Most people don't realize that. They think of the television or movie storyline of Frankenstein, which doesn't include that at all.
No.
So you're up for a bit of chilly storytelling then?
All right.
All righty. So I'm going to entice you by a few lines from a great poem by a Canadian named Robert Service. I don't know if you've heard the poem, but it's called The Cremation of Sam McGee, and it's one of my favorites. It starts, "There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake LaBarge. I cremated Sam McGee." Have you ever heard the poem?
I have heard that poem.
It's a great one, isn't it?
It is.
Well, today we're not moiling for gold, nor are we cremating anybody, but we are the Arctic trails with secret tale. In fact, we're going on a U.S. expedition, joining a group of men and, believe it or not, women, who were part of one of the first serious attempts to reach the North Pole way back in October of 1871. So, just a little bit of schooling here, Darcy. Did you know that there were two North Poles? There's two. There's one called the true geographic North Pole, and that's the northernmost point on Earth at the absolute top of the world and registers at 90 degrees latitude. The other North Pole is the magnetic North Pole, where a needle on a compass will point straight down. So this is close to, but not the same as the true North Pole, and its location moves according to the magnetic changes in the Earth's outer core. So today we're heading towards both of these poles, and it's going to get never-ending dark, bone-freezingly cold, and intriguingly mysterious. So I should have asked you up front, have you been able to download the photos?
I can see them.
Okay, great. Have a look at photo number 1, which shows the Earth in a flattened perspective. There's a horizontal red line across to almost the very top.
Yeah.
And that's the latitude of 82 degrees. So a hair off 90 degrees, which is our North Pole. I've added a red X to note where our location is going to be today. You may not be able to see clearly enough, Darcy, but we're off the northern west coast of Greenland. Yeah. So any sense of our story as yet?
Other than it's really cold? No, not yet. But, my impression again would be we're headed down that trail, or who did it?
We're going on a voyage on the USS Polaris with its crew of 25 souls. Now check out our second pick, photo number 2, to see its route up the Davis Strait, with Greenland on the right and both Baffin and Ellesmere Islands on the left. Now, I don't know about you, Darcy, but I barely heard of these islands, much less spent any time looking at them on a map, which as a Canadian is probably kind of shameful, but we are way, way, way far north.
At Thank God Harbour?
At Thank God Harbour. Isn't that a hallelujah name? I just love it. Thank God Harbour in Greenland. It's now been renamed, but we're going to stick with Thank God Harbour at the moment. Now, imagine traveling the frozen seas on a sailing ship, not a modern Coast Guard icebreaker, a reinforced sailing ship over 150 years ago. Would you be doing that?
Well, maybe 150 years ago, yes, but nowadays, no. I want my creature comfort.
You'd have more creature comforts today, I think, than you would have had 150 years ago.
Yes.
Okay, well, we're going to now meet the cast of our four main characters. They're four men. As I mentioned at the top, we're investigating a famous, mysterious death of one of today's Arctic explorers. So our questions to you are going to be the classic trio. Who died? How did he die? And did anyone help him die?
All right.
So let's get on board with the USS Polaris and meet her command crew. Turn to photo number 3. You'll see an ink drawing of a well-known and experienced captain named Sidney Buddington. To me, he's got a strong face, kind eyes, and the classic tidy sea captain's beard. What do you think of Sidney Buddington?
Well, he looks like a true captain. Very strong would be a really good word of it. He looks aged. He looks like he's been on the sea for a while. Debonair. Definitely. Yeah. I would definitely say a nice man. You know, he's a captain, right? He's the captain of the ship.
Well, next up in photo number 4 is a fellow named Emile Bessel. And he's our ship's physician and chief scientist. He's got a strong academic background and a research background. And in my mind, he's got great hair, piercing eyes, and one of those bushy forked beards. Yeah. What do you think, Dr. Bessels?
Well, the first thing I thought when I got goosebumps, and then I thought, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Oh, really?
That's what I thought.
Just because he's a physician?
No, because of the eyes.
Because of the eyes. Yes, he's got very nice or very intriguing eyes. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, now moving on to our next fellow, who's called Captain George Tyson. He's the knowledgeable and able chief navigator. This engraving shows him with what I would call I think they're mutton chop sideburns. Yeah, he looks like a solid kind of guy.
Yeah.
Okie doke. And lastly, but not least, we have a fellow called Charles Francis Hall, whom you'll find in image number 6. He appears to be sort of a genial, rotund fellow with an extensive full beard, and he reminds me of the famous actor-director Orson Welles.
You're right, he does, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Very much so. That's someone you would think would be on a vessel.
Okay, that's very...
Because he's more, like, to me, a politician, more like, you know, the glad hand where you meet them, shake your hand, off they go. He does not strike me as a captain.
Well, he's not a captain.
Okay, or to be on, be on the vessel. It just doesn't strike me as the type of person who would do it.
Insightful, because we know a bit more about Hall than the others, because amazingly enough, he's the architect of this voyage.
Really?
Yeah, he was an engraver and a newspaperman from Cincinnati, but he became obsessed with Sir John Franklin's Arctic expedition, which happened in 1845. So, 25 years before this is happening. You may recall Franklin had an attempt to find the North Pole. It unfortunately failed. Both ships were locked in ice near King William Island up in what's now Nunavut, and they all died. 129 souls on board died. Many searches were sent out to find these vessels, any of the men on the expedition, and none were successful. And Hall wanted to do it. He wanted to find out what happened to Franklin. And he educated himself about the Arctic and about the Franklin expedition. And he managed to get enough money to get an expedition going under his own control. Now, even though there were many, many searches, the actual discovery of these two vessels of Franklin's, I'll just put in as an aside, occurred quite recently. In 2014, believe it or not, Parks Canada found the wreck of the vessel, the Erebus. And 2 years later, an organization called the Arctic Research Foundation found the second vessel, the Terror. So our guy, Charles Hall, wasn't successful in finding the Franklin expedition, but he was successful. As you say, he's a businessman, doesn't look at all like a guy who'd be on an expedition.
No.
But in fact, he got himself on 2 previous expeditions and then eventually got himself into this one where he got money from the government and he received a ship, which was newly called the Polaris. And he was able to build up and create his own major expedition to the North Pole, amazingly enough.
You know, when you look at him, when you look at the other men, like Captain Tyson, he looks like he's got that energy that would say, hey, look, I'm the head of this team. This other guy is almost like he's there, but how could I word it in such a way? Like, I'm there, I'm behind it, but he doesn't strike me as the leader.
You'll find out why that's such an insightful comment as we move along. It's very interesting and it's quite telling. So you'll recall I mentioned at the beginning that, believe it or not, there were women on board.
Yeah.
Amazing thing in 1870s. What happened is Hall spent time in his previous 2 semi-parts on expeditions. He spent time with the Inuit and he became friends with many of them. And he brought along on this expedition 2 guides who were experts, obviously, in the Arctic as well. They were hunters and guides, and they had their own wives and children, and they came on board too, amazingly enough. So if you look at the next photo, number 7, it's, I think, a wonderful, I think it's pen and ink drawing perhaps of Hall and 2 of his Inuit friends. And they're wearing astonishingly traditional clothing, furs and sealskin. And, you know, I can't imagine what they're made of, but they're just remarkable looking, don't you think?
They are. They're amazing. The one, actually, when you look at the one under the number 7, it looks like there's an actual tree and forest design on his. Now I realize it's the rendering of the artist, but Hall wasn't much difference in height. So
yeah, he's not a very, I don't think any of them are very large. And certainly the one on the left is a gal, based on the hair, I'm guessing, in the face, but I could be wrong.
Well, no, it looks like a lady to me too.
Yeah, I just think the outfits are remarkable. I would love to have had a color version of this to see exactly what kinds of furs and skins they are wearing. But obviously just the stuff that you need to wear in the Arctic in the 1870s, and they would know.
Yep.
So as you mentioned, it's interesting that Hall is involved in this because he had excellent survival skills based on his time with the Inuit. He was no academic, he was no scientist, and he was no leader of men. And he wasn't a naval person. Based on his study and his previous experience, he was considered to be an expert on the Arctic itself and on the Franklin expedition. So, Darcy, I should say our stage or our cruise is now set. It's September 1871, and the USS Polaris has sailed into the place, Thank God Harbour, in northwest Greenland. On the shore, as Robert Service called it, the barge, in cremation of Samagee, the shore of this remote location is where the ship and the crew anchored for the winter. So Hall and his crew saw the sun for the very last time that winter of 1871 on October 13th. They would survive each and every short day in a vague twilight and by afternoon, total darkness, and would do so until the dawn reappeared, not until early March the next year. This is commonly referred to as a polar night, around 180 days worth, a long, long time to be in the dark. Temperatures were ranging in the mid minus 20 degrees Celsius. Bone-chilling cold, mind-numbing darkness. A potent mix for trouble, don't you think, Darcy?
I would think so. Just the lack of melatonin alone.
Right.
Serotonin. Oh my God, that would just be crazy. People must have been depressed.
Yeah. Can you get a sense of anything going to happen here?
Well, look, there could be a little, I know there's a term for it where they go mad.
Yeah.
Like I want to call it ice madness or darkness madness. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
There are lots of possibilities. Okay, have a look at photo number 8. It's an action-packed painting, and it's really brilliantly done by an artist named William Bradford. It depicts the ship, the Polaris, trapped in the ice of Thank God Harbour.
Yeah.
If you look closely, you'll see members of her crew are unloading stock from the boat. Others are hauling the smaller boats about and handling the supplies. A pair of sled dogs in the foreground on the left are tussling over bloody meat. There's boats, there's barrels, there's all kinds of stuff scattered about the snow-covered shore. And for me, 3 things really strike me from this really fine painting. First, the gray-blue chill of the snow and the sky. I can just feel how cold it is. The overwhelming feeling of desolation. It just looks like they're nowhere, in the middle of nowhere in this vast winter landscape. And just the ridiculous tininess of the people and the boat trying to conquer this vast and challenging landscape.
Well, and the fact that the boat is literally surrounded by frozen water.
Right, exactly. Trapped at the top of the world in the middle of winter, in the dark. God help us. So the time for deadly action is nigh. Although the crew in this painting appeared to be working amicably, in fact, there were troubled waters with this crew from the onset. Roughly half the crew were American, the other half German. And almost immediately, members split into rival groups based on these 2 nationalities. And here we come to your idea of Hall being an odd fellow to be involved in this. Many resented his authority, especially since he lacked both sailing and scientific expertise.
Oh, yeah.
He was a major micromanager, and this created a lot of friction. And he often offended Captain Budlington and Dr. Bessels, instructing them in manners and work that was totally outside of his domain. Now, Hall decides he has these daily exploits to reckon out into the land to sort of look for routes to the North Pole. So he was preparing to do one of these little sojourns, and he didn't trust the captain. Now, have you got a sense of why he might not be trusting the captain?
Well, if they resented him for being in charge, the captain may have been trying to take control of the expedition, of the people around him. Probably came cuff to fist, maybe, or pretty close.
Well, that's probably pretty true. And also, the captain had what many knew of as a strong weakness. He loved alcohol. So here you are, you're a ship's captain, you're stuck in ice. I would imagine you don't have a lot of responsibilities. So he spent, I think, a fair amount of time, with the little tipples of alcohol, maybe a bit of rum. So Hall was concerned that if he left the ship, perhaps Budlington wouldn't be the one to be in charge of it. He told the navigator Tyson of his concerns and asked him to be on the lookout for the captain, the crew, and the ship. So he felt okay about leaving. Off Hall goes for a few days. Have a look at photo number 9, and you'll have another image. It's just another pen and ink drawing of Captain Budington. Can you get a sense more of Captain Budington?
Wow, he sure looks different than that first one, doesn't he?
Doesn't he just? I was thinking the same thing.
I wouldn't have pegged it to be the same person. There's that 1,000-yard stare of where I'm not really there, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
My mind's occupied in other places. He probably thinks he's a very intelligent person. He may be intelligent where, say, the sailing of a vessel is concerned, but for the rest of it, I would say Hall has a better understanding of how life works.
Okay. Well, Hall returned on October 24th.
Okay.
Hall arrives back. He's explored a few routes for his trip, his push to finally get to the North Pole. And if you look at image number 10, you'll see pen and ink of Hall as well. What do you think of him there?
Again, different type of look, more concentrated, intense. I can see why you said micromanager, because there it is on his face. So very determined.
Yeah, he is very determined. And again, he's very much like my guy, Orson Welles, I think.
Yes, very much like him. Hear the music in the background.
Well, this is where the story really breaks open. Hall comes back, and I have a narrative account from a book written by the Dr. Bessels. And Dr. Bessels says this is what happened. His book is called The Polaris, the Chief Scientist's Recollections of the American North Pole Expedition, 1871 to 73. He writes, Hall immediately went to his cabin without removing his fur clothing and drank a cup of coffee. Minutes later, he experienced giddiness, a severe headache, and began vomiting. Unfortunately, this indisposition did not pass quickly. It was a precursor to a stroke, which assailed him in the evening and paralyzed his left side. He slowly began to recover the next day, but he suffered, like you had said, from a temporary serious mental derangement. He began to feel paranoid. He believed somebody was trying to kill him, that somebody wanted to stab or poison or shoot him. Now, this might be, as you say, the darkness, the lack of light in the body, or the fact that he's having this bizarre fit or a stroke. We don't really know. One of the Inuit has a first-person account that's taken from a book called The Frozen Zone, and it explores. And he says of Hall, very sick last night. I asked him, what is the matter? He says, I do not know. I took a cup of coffee. In a little while, very sick and vomiting. Complained of stomach ache, headache, bone ache. But he got better. So Hall spent a few days improving, and Dr. Bessels, the ship's physician, states that he began to eat red meat. He had seal meat. He drank red wine. He got up and wandered about the ship, so he was improving. But Frozen Zone says that Hall refused food, only drank liquid brought to him by his Inuit friend, and he refused Dr. Bessels' offer of medical assistance. What do you think happened to Hall?
Okay, I'm leaning to the second account of he refused to eat or drink anything unless his Inuit friend brought it to him because he trusted him.
Okay.
Maybe the coffee wasn't for him. Okay. And he went in, he didn't look, he just drank a cup of coffee. So he could have had some form of poisoning is where I'd go with this. But then again, did someone poison him, or was it because of the conditions? And if he had been higher up in a different type of altitude and then came back, he could have had altitude sickness. Even though it may be a straight line and flat, you're still changing. Maybe he needed time to acclimatize.
That's something I hadn't thought of. That's a very good point. I don't really know the length or height of his route, but certainly conditions could affect him to such an extent he came back and didn't get a chance to adjust to the new climate, so to speak. Well, he goes along pretty well for a few days, and then he is again asked by Bessels to have some medication, have some support from a health perspective. And the Bessels asks the ship's chaplain to encourage Hall to take medical aid. Hall finally relents, takes whatever medical aid, and it's quinine that the doctor gives him. Now, the interesting thing is Buddington, the captain, says to Hall, I'll take some of the quinine and prove to you there's nothing wrong with it, because Hall is still in a state, I think, of feeling quite paranoid. But Bessels refuses that, doesn't allow Buddington. There might be more nefarious reasons, we don't know, but he didn't allow Buddington to have the medication. So Hall accepted the help, took the medication, fell ill, suffered the same symptoms, vomiting and delirium. And what happened to him, do you think?
He probably died.
He did. Sadly, he died on November 8th. Now, Bessels claims he died of what they called in those days apoplexy. Today, we would call a stroke. Now, Bessels, as we said earlier, mentioned that Hall had a stroke. Now, that was in his account, not necessarily in other accounts. But so he might have had a stroke in the past. So that may not have been unusual. But others' accounts say that Hall didn't have a stroke, that he was poisoned. So really, we don't know what happened here. And that's what we're going to kind of explore with you. The truth of at least one really, I think, admirable comment is, despite Hall's attitude, and despite the fact that his crew found him maybe a bit officious and above his station, in fact, when he died, they were very seriously grieving him, very much so, especially his Inuit friends, but the other crew members. One of the accounts actually mentions the somber and reverberating sound of the hammer making the coffin in the ship that resounded throughout the area and really pulled everybody down. So Hall's body is taken ashore, buried in a 2-foot grave on land overlooking Thank God Harbour in Greenland. Now, we know, and our guy Robert Service told us in the cremation of Sam McGee, it ain't easy to bury someone in the north. Yeah. Sam McGee is cremated, but Charles Hall is given a more traditional and respectful burial. As described in the book The Frozen Zone, it takes 2 days to dig a grave with picks and ice chisels and axes in the flint-light ground, and again on the 3rd day after his death. So the funeral procession happens at 11 a.m. on the 10th of November. They move from the ship to the shore. The ship's bell was rung on board. The dogs began to howl loudly. The coffin, covered with a flag, lashed securely due to strong winds, rode on a low dog sledge, and this was hauled by the crew. Men with lanterns walked on either side, with the officers following the sledge. So we have a great illustration of this very sad procession, Darcy. Photo number 11. Have a look at this. I really think it's quite a remarkable image. Can you describe it and tell us what you gleaned?
Oh, yeah. So in the lead, there's 8 men pulling the sled, one leading with the lantern, people behind with a dog to the side, and somber. Yeah, it comes right out. Like you can see there's this heaviness about them.
Isn't it? I wonder who actually created this illustration, but it really, to me, is representative of what it must have been like. You could tell the light is dim. Yeah. It's like a twilight kind of time. And as you say, their heads are all bowed. They're carrying what's called a hurricane lamp.
Yeah.
And they're very sad. And he's got the one dog accompanying them in the front.
Yeah.
Well, the conditions at the time, weather-wise, were again, awful. And as they describe it in the Frozen Zone book, once we reached the grave, only a short prayer could be said, since an icy gale was now blowing, whirling up clouds of snow, dimming the light from the hurricane lamps. The coffin was lowered. Everyone threw a handful of frozen earth on it. And that's it. And we have an idea from the next image, number 12, of how eerie and haunting this must have been in such a desolate place, in such frigid weather, in the near darkness, lit only by these hurricane lamps. I mean, it just brings the chills up my spine.
Yeah.
What do you think? There he is, the coffin in that frozen ground with people looking over it.
Yeah, and it barely is in the ground.
That's right, it barely is.
And the lantern casting that eerie look like when you hold the flashlight up.
Yeah.
But interesting, why do they call him Captain Hall when he wasn't a captain?
No, and that's my mistake. It's just Charles Francis
Yeah.
Hall. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. And the child by the grave, you know?
Yes, exactly. A child by the grave. We knew there were some children on board, some Inuit. Don't know that necessarily all their ages, but they were young. So yes, imagine. That's a very sad, somber scene.
I'm actually surprised they didn't use fire to help melt the ice a bit because they're going through ice as well as slate.
Now, I don't know how easy it was to have access to
Fire.
a lot of fire with that wind.
Because when I think about it, like there, you didn't see any trees anywhere. So
No,
when
it's
it blows, it blows.
Yeah, way above the tree line. Yeah, we've got really not much happening there at all. So yes, as you noted, the coffin is barely in the ground.
Yeah.
And I guess they covered it up so it becomes looking like a little bit of a cairn probably in the future. Okay, well then here we are, Darcy. How did Charles Francis Hall die? Did he die due to a stroke or other natural cause? Was it something far more sinister, like the poisoning he feared, or something else? What do you say?
Okay, well, one, he could have been allergic to it, and I can see why the doctor wouldn't give it to the captain, because, you know, why give a perfectly healthy heart something that could jumpstart it?
Exactly.
He did portray the paranoia, the fear of people in the process of having a heart attack, because people tend to get paranoid when they're having a heart attack because they don't know what it is.
Right.
He did exhibit that, but the fact that I can't see how a cup of coffee would have done that in the first place, unless he had an aneurysm that was ready to burst.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and hot, cold to heart. They were in extreme weathers, and we don't know how hard did he run alongside the sleigh? Did he walk? I'd love to blame the doctor for this, okay? But even because he does remind me of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but I actually think the man had a heart attack.
A stroke, a heart attack.
I think he had a heart attack, and maybe it could have been a little bit of a stroke at the beginning, but at the end of the day, he had a heart attack.
Okay. When the crew, and they eventually returned to homeland, took them 2 years and a lot of great adventures. There was a naval inquiry into Hall's death, but there were no charges laid. And so nothing was really obviously done for many years. But in the 60s, there was a fellow called Dr. Chauncey Loomis, and he became Hall's biographer. He was intrigued by Hall's death, and in particular, he thought Hall could have been poisoned. He concludes in his biography, which is of Hall called Weird and Tragic Shores, that murder was at least possible and plausible. So in the 60s, he's requesting a permit from Greenland to disinter Hall's remains and conduct an autopsy. Amazingly, the Greenland officials said okay. In August of 68, they did just that. They found Hall's body in actually not ridiculous.
Deteriorated?
Yeah, he hadn't deteriorated. Well, he's been in the permafrost, I guess. So he had some flesh, and most of his hair and his beard remained on the body. From his torso down was completely encased in ice, so not reachable. But the pathologist worked for 3 hours in situ. God help them in that weather, I'm sure. And even in August, it wouldn't be nice. And removed some hair, fingernail samples, and a triangle of skull. So forensic tests later proved something. What did they prove, do you think?
Probably that he was either poisoned or allergic to something. Was he still alive when they buried him?
That would be cool. But no, I don't believe he was alive when he died.
I'm going to say that there's a good possibility they may have found trace evidence of. I still feel like he died naturally.
Okay, interesting. Well, they found a large quantity of arsenic that was supposedly ingested in the last 2 weeks of his life. Now, I believe I've heard this on some crime shows that arsenic will appear in the hair, and it will literally appear in the time frame that it's being used, and then it will no longer ingesting it. It will disappear in your hair, like will no longer be there. So they were able to get a date, a time frame of 2 weeks roughly, where he had a large amount of arsenic. Now, the idea is arsenic can produce the same kind of symptoms: intestinal pain, Vomiting, delirium, mania, stupor, all are evident in acute arsenic poisoning. Did someone administer that poison and murder Hall deliberately?
I'm still going to say no.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, number one, Darcy, in those days, arsenic was used a lot as a medication by people for all kinds of stuff. So Hall himself could be partially to blame because he could have been using it, as I think probably many, many people did. However, Dr. Loomis, the biographer, says there are, he thinks, two possible suspects for something more nefarious. He cites Budlington and Bessels. Now, I looked at the research on them. It doesn't seem to me that Budlington had much of a motive. I mean, maybe he was at odds with Hall's, interfering and telling him to do stuff that he already knew how to do, and it wasn't Hall's business to tell him. But I can't really see that as a motive for murder. Plus, he didn't really have any opportunity. Supposedly, he wasn't visiting Hall during the time that Hall was ill. And he isn't a doctor, so he had no access to the arsenic or the ability to administer it. So I don't think Budlington can possibly be a person of interest here. What do you think about it?
I don't think he is. We're going to blame someone. Let's blame the doctor.
Okay, and you had earlier said you'd love to blame the doctor because he initially reminded you of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Well, this guy, of course, he is a medical man. He had means, he had opportunity, but I don't think he really had any motive as far as they knew. He wanted to press further north. Budlington didn't want to press further north. So actually, Bessels was on Hall's side in that regard. Why would he kill the guy who's going to push north and allow Bessels to get to the North Pole? I can't see it as a motive.
But didn't they used to use arsenic for tanning hides at one point? Could he have actually been wearing his poison? I
know that certainly they used dangerous substances for tanning hides. There's no doubt. And that's possible. And as I said, he could certainly be using arsenic himself as just part of how they, managed their own health in those days.
Yeah.
So Loomis talks about the fact that Bessels, pushed Hall to have some medical attention. Hall didn't want it. Bessels pushed for it and asked the chaplain to help out. Also, Loomis mentions that Bessels wouldn't give Budlington the same medication that he was giving Hall. Now, we've come to a reasonable conclusion that you wouldn't give anybody medication, literally medication like quinine or arsenic, if you didn't need it.
Yeah.
So that's sort of an unfair accusation. But the idea that Hall didn't want his help and he was pushed to take his help is a bit suspicious.
Well, yeah, because, he's sick. Like, I don't want people touching me when I'm sick. Don't come near me. I'll call you when I need help. But back then, like, as a doctor, his Hippocratic oath is to make sure the man's okay. I mean, I don't rule out that the doctor might have had some play in it, but because it happened over a 2-week time, and because I believe he wouldn't eat food or drink from anyone unless it was his Inuit friend, then he had to be doing it to himself.
Okay, good. And so he wasn't doing it deliberately to kill himself. He was just overcommitting himself.
Well, yeah, he probably thought it was going to help him feel better.
I guess that's why they would take arsenic in the first place, not to kill themselves, but to actually make themselves better. Yeah.
And because we only have one doctor who did testing on him, I'd say if his body was frozen then, it's probably still frozen there too. Let's go up and get some more samples and see.
Yeah, fair enough.
This guy really, he had a one-way direction, and it was about saying that the doctor was guilty.
Yes. Now, Dr. Loomis concludes that perhaps Bessels murdered Hall, just perhaps, but we can never really know what happened among this crew group. And so that was then, though, Darcy. Something happened 45 years later. Very, very unusual occurrence. Now, what do you think might have happened?
They did what I said, go back up, get some more samples.
That would have been a good idea, but no, this is something totally from left field. There was an online auction, and a historical envelope was for sale in this online auction. And it ends up that it's an envelope bearing Hall's name and addressed to a young woman called Vinnie Ream in New York City. Now, Vinnie Ream was an attractive 22-year-old sculptor, singer, and musician. And she's best known for a life-size statue of Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, which stands today in the rotunda of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So let's have a look at Vinnie first, and then we'll see her famous statue of Lincoln. So look at photo number 13 and check out Vinnie Ream.
Well, she's beautiful.
She is indeed.
She's gorgeous.
She is gorgeous, isn't she?
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I don't think she had anything to do with this, but there's definitely energy here that I would have said she may. Her passion would be her art, however she expressed it.
Oh, okay. Well, speaking of her art, have a look at 14 and see what an amazing sculptor she was. He did that.
Holy cow.
Life-size, it's big life. Actually, it's phenomenal statue of Lincoln. Yeah, I'm really impressed. Well, it ends up that Vinnie Ream liked older men. And she met Hall when the Polaris was being stocked for the voyage. They had dinner a few times, and in fact, Bessels accompanied them on several occasions. So it's thought to be now that there might have been the old eternal triangle. Though married, Hall liked Vinnie. Vinnie really liked Hall, and Bessels, it appears, was totally infatuated with Vinnie. He wrote her before sailing that he thought of her all the time. He greatly anticipated seeing her again and would cherish her memory when he was at sea. Now, there's no record of her writing to Bessels, but she sent Hall a number of gifts, including personal notes, a photo of this Lincoln statue, and a bust of Lincoln himself, all of which Hall acknowledged having in his cabin on the Polaris when he affectionately wrote her back in August 1871. So, letters of interest from two men, Hall and Bessels. But is that enough motive for murder in the high Arctic?
There's been less motive for murder.
You took my next line. Folks have been murdered for less.
Yes. So, yeah, there's a possibility, but I keep hearing no. Because what good was it going to do him when he got back and she still has nothing to do with him?
Right. And I can't see, I mean, why would you, out of the blue in September or October of 1871 and then into November, why would you suddenly decide this is the time I'm going to knock off Charles Hall?
Well,
they hadn't even accomplished their goal yet.
Yeah.
What's the point of that? I don't see it. So you're saying that Hall poisoned himself, really, over his lifetime, maybe over the time of being on the board ship?
Yeah.
And that's his own doing.
And to me, it's so accidental. It's not on purpose. And honestly, the doctor, if anything, because I would have thought she'd be the victim if he was going to murder anyone, because then Hall would have been devastated.
So you get a sense that Hall really cared for Ream?
Yes.
And she for him?
Yeah.
But Bessels cared for her, but she didn't care for Bessels. Yeah. Right. Well, we have no idea what happened, of course, and we unfortunately know nothing about what happened with Vinnie Ream or with Bessels when Bessels came back to the States. No follow-up. So presumably Bessels and Vinnie Ream did not get together.
No, I would say no.
Yeah. So a very queer tale, don't you think, Darcy?
Absolutely.
So have a look at our last pick. It's a pen and ink drawing of the grave, and they call him Captain Hall in this as well.
Okay.
Yes, because he was on ship, they called the navigator a captain. So maybe it was a more common term than we think of today. But there's the grave of C.F. Hall on the shores of Hall. Now it's called Hall Bay. Used to be Thank God Harbour, and I think Thank God Harbour is just so much better name.
Yes.
In northwest Greenland. So do you see anything from seeing that sad little grave in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah. No, he accepted his death and moved on.
Really?
Yep. I mean,
Wow.
I feel nothing lingering, but I would love someone to go up, take another sample and find out if it's still there. Or if it was a one-off. And, I think it may have been partly his trip of his exploration away from the vessel.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about it, he got sick when he came back, so it had already been in his system.
Right.
And then it just progressively got worse. And it could have been, what about the tins they used? They were not notorious for scrubbing out their tins and washing them and sterilizing them like we do nowadays.
Yep, definitely a lot of issues that came about from metal poisoning on these northern expeditions, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And they did go mad as a result of these poisonings.
Yep. But can you imagine it's going to always be that bleak and isolated for him? There's never going to be shade, just the wind howling over his grave.
I know, isn't that awful? Although maybe, do you think Hall's okay with it?
I think he's fine. He's dead. It's just a carcass.
Well, as the poet Robert Service said, the Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights. And I would say today, Darcy, we've seen and experienced a few of them.
Yes.
That was really interesting. Very different from some of our other. Going to the north, I just was thinking that would be kind of a fun experience to see what it was like to be in that time frame with those men on board that ship, and to learn that you feel Hall was responsible inadvertently for his own death, that Dr. Bessels wasn't a murderer, no one else on ship was a murderer, and that it was unfortunately his own fault.
Yes.
Which is, I think, a very sensible conclusion based on what we know.
You picked a good week to do this, the cold.
It's very cool today on Vancouver Island, that's for sure. I'm thinking myself, it's maybe 0 to -3 or 4. Can you imagine the -20s and 30s? And then in addition to that, the wind chill, and in addition to that, the darkness. I don't know, just the whole isolation of being with the same group of people on a tiny ship for a long time with not good food, not good relationships. I just think it must be a microcosm of terrible, terrible problems.
Absolutely. I'm actually surprised they didn't run out of food before they got back to March.
Well, I think what they were fortunate, Darcy, is they had the Inuit guides and they were expert hunters. Okay. And in fact, when Hall died, the group actually split up just by circumstance. And the Inuit guides were the ones who helped the group really survive by being able to kill seals and other wildlife and keep them alive, because it took them many, many months to be found eventually and to return home.
Yeah.
So I guess that's lucky that they had them there.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, we're now leaving Greenland's high Arctic. Before you yank off your thermal undies, you may wish to tune into our episode number 16. Titled Death and Dyatlov Pass, episode 16 is set in the dead winter of northern Russia, and Darcy and I explore the unsolved mystery surrounding the bizarre deaths of 9 Soviet hikers in 1959. Darcy's in fine fettle, quickly tuning into the frightening last moments of the experienced trekkers. Death in Dyatlov Pass will give you chills, guaranteed. You may find this episode of Seeing Dead People, along with 32 others, on our RadioSidney webpage. And if you're curious as to Darcy's abilities and methodologies, please check out our ever-growing list of listeners' questions, also instantly downloadable at radiosidney.ca. Ranging from Darcy's handling of spirits, tarot cards, and hauntings, each question and answer provides an amazing insight into her unusual life as a psychic. One of my faves is question 20, where Darcy reveals secrets from some of her readings.
Thank you for listening to Seeing Dead People, where goosebumps are guaranteed. We would love to hear from you with questions for Darcy about her psychic process, or suggestions for other mystifying situations you would like us to investigate. Please shoot us an email to info@radiosidney.ca with Seeing Dead People in the subject line. New episodes air on our website, radiosidney.ca, on the first Saturday of every month. Episodes repeat Saturday nights at 8 p.m. and Sunday mornings at 10 a.m., both Pacific time. All episodes are available as downloadable podcasts at our website or on our YouTube channel, Nicola Furlong Mysteries. I'm Dorian Mortis, weirdly keen on seeing dead people. This has been a presentation of Radio Sydney.